So let me welcome you. Um, welcome you to Defusing Teen Stress, Navigating Tough Times, and Finding Healing. That's the title of our program today. And this program is sponsored as a public service by the Christian Science churches in Orinda and Pleasant Hill, California. And we have three speakers tonight who will each be bringing a different perspective to the question of how to handle this difficult topic. And we hope that the information they provide and the insights that they provide from their different perspectives and their different life experiences will be helpful to you or a loved one or someone that you know. My name is Bill Brugman. I'll be your host for tonight. And we believe this topic is important for our communities. And we actually selected the topic prior to the pandemic as something that was a critical need in our communities, that somebody in one of the congregations expressed a lot of concern, who is a teacher, about the levels of stress and depression that many of the students had. And of course, now with the pandemic and the sheltering in place and the disruption of all the normal routines, if anything, that those concerns have amplified. And so our hope is that this program will bring to you or your loved ones some new perspectives and some information that may help to provide you with greater peace, greater joy, and healing. So the format is that we have three speakers, and they'll each be taking about 20 minutes each. And then after that first hour is done, then we're going to open it up for questions from you. And for those of you who are participating by internet device, I hope you'll see down at the bottom of your screen a little Q&A icon. And that's your opportunity. You can click on that icon and then type in a question or a comment that you would like the panel to respond to. And we do hope that you'll do that, because this is not meant to be just purely a one-way street where the speakers speak and you just sit there and listen. We hope that it'll spark thoughts and questions, and that you'll share those with us, and that the panel can then respond to those as well. For those who are participating by telephone, you won't be able to actually present questions during the program, but we will, at the end of the program, provide you with information as to how you can contact any of the speakers to follow up with them, to ask questions in that way. And we hope some of you tuned in early enough that you saw the resources page that we put up to begin with. We have put together a short page of resources for help, immediate help, if someone is feeling stress or depression or has suicidal tendencies. And these are hotlines and numbers, phone numbers for people that you can call for help, and the help will be there for you. That information will again be shown at the end of this program. It will have it up, and you can copy it down. Again, I'm afraid that the people participating on phone won't be able to see that, but we do have something for you folks too, which is a phone number. And if you take this phone number down and call it and leave your contact information, then we'll get back to you and find out how we can send that information to you. So if you have a piece of paper and a pencil or pen right now, then I'll give it to you. You can write it down. I will also be giving it to you near the end of the program. so that in case you don't have access to a pen and pencil right now, you can write it down later. But that number is area code 925-932-1415. Again, 925-932-1415. And I'll give that to you again later at the end of the program. Let me also just say a few words about Christian Science for those of you who aren't familiar with it, since this is sponsored by the Christian Science churches in Pleasant Hill and Orinda. Christian Science is a Bible-based and Christian religion, and it points out a pathway to harmony and health through a change of perspective, a change from a material to a more spiritual perspective. And I'm sure Melanie will be sharing more about Christian Science and how you do that kind of change of perspective later on in the program. I assume that most of you have seen the flyer for this program, so I'm not going to go into detail about the bios of the three speakers. I'm really just going to introduce them, and they'll probably give a little bit of their own background as part of their discussion. So without further ado, what I'd like to do is turn it over to Scott Chavez, who comes to us from the Contra Costa Crisis Center. And Scott, it's all yours.
Well, thank you for the invitation to speak to everyone here who is watching us live, as well as those who will watch what is posted in the days ahead. I'd like to start by bringing up my PowerPoint. So I'll take a moment, and I hope that I can do this successfully. Let me see here. Share the screen, and share the screen, and share the screen. And it's on my screen. Is it on other people's screens? I'll trust so. I'll trust that someone might send me a message.
You're good.
Good. Excellent. Thank you very much. Oh, and since we're having our little dialogue, at least between you and me, Bill, I want to remind you and invite you to help me with timing. So in fact, it looks like I'll get to speak until around 8 o'clock. I'll try to keep a watch on the clock here. I have so much to say. I'm so accustomed to speaking and saying much more that I'll have to try to cut myself back here and in fact take a breath from time to time. So let me start off. I'm with the Contra Costa Crisis Center. I've been here actually for 10 years coming up. I started as a volunteer and was answering crisis calls, our own local crisis lines, as well as calls on the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. Then after about 3 years of volunteering, I came on staff, continuing to answer calls. And to this day, I continue to answer calls. And then also I've become involved in training and outreach, therefore my title here of Outreach and Training Lead. I have on the PowerPoint, and I'll be happy to share the PowerPoint, how to contact either our agency, either at a business level or certainly the phone numbers that you've seen before, and I'll present them again and even state them in a few moments. So let me move on to the next slide here. Did that work? No, it's not working just yet. Let's see here. Oh, here's the next slide. So there's our web address, crisis-center.org. And then there's a card. I just want to say this is one panel of a 3-part wallet card related to suicide prevention. Very simplified, but here's our information. Calling 211. That is here in Contra Costa, because we at this agency answer the 211 info and referral line, we can also make it very easy for people to reach us. If you and your phone are in Contra Costa and you dial 211, your call will come to our office right here where I'm sitting, which by the way, that is Monterey behind me. But anyway, just a picture there for this Facebook and Zoom meeting. Anyway, you could just dial 211 or our 800 number, 833-2900. Also text HOPE to 20121. Then, as I mentioned, we also answer calls on the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. Anytime anyone Googles suicide or depression, something like that, certainly the national line comes up more often than our own local line. So calls that go to the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline are routed to local centers. So some of those come right here to our office in Contra Costa County. Let me move on to the next slide. Let me give a brief overview. I always like to try to give a sense of direction of where I hope to go and what I hope to cover in the allotted time. So I'm going to quickly go over some of our services here at Contra Costa Crisis Center, and then talk about suicide prevention, language of suicide awareness, myths that some folks have a sense of understanding or misunderstanding, and hopefully we can come up with some other ideas. How to help someone, that is so important. Asking directly about suicide, safety planning for someone who may be at any level of risk, whether that's low risk, moderate risk, high risk, safety planning, and then protective factors. Hopefully we'll have time for all of this. Maybe not, and if not, I'd be happy to go back to it if something is of interest to someone during the question and answer time. So an overall view of our services. We have 24-hour crisis lines. And for those of you who can see the PowerPoint, you see that I've put ... comma, ... That means I have 2 slides coming up. So I'm going to say more about that in 2 upcoming slides in just a moment. Then, as I already mentioned, we do answer the 24-hour 211 info and referral line, which is more about services in the community. I'll say a little bit more about that on another slide. Homeless services, we give information about that. And then we also encourage folks right now, 2020 census, be sure to sign up. Grief counseling. Now, I don't have a ... I want to say we have grief counseling. It's been a part of our agency for some 40 years, where we have groups that meet right here at our office. Sometimes we go to other locations in Contra Costa. And then right now we're just starting a trial basis of a Zoom grief group. Now, we have different groups, but I want to highlight this in this talk related to suicide prevention, that one of our groups is what we call survivor after suicide loss. Another way that some people use the phrasing is survivor of suicide loss. And it is so important that folks who have suffered a loss and feel that pain, there are unique aspects of that pain, and that people can get support, whether through us or through other resources. Then something else that we have is mobile grief response, where we have some of our counselors. You always hear about this when there's been a tragedy in the community, that there are grief counselors on hand. So our volunteers and staff are ready to go to locations, to schools or businesses where there has been a very untimely, tragic death. And maybe that's a suicide, or maybe that's a homicide, or maybe it's just an untimely illness that affects a given community. And it's so valuable to have folks on hand after that moment. Then community outreach and training, and that's part of what I'm doing right now. Moving on. So our crisis lines, you've seen it before. You can see it again or hear it again. Just call us here at 211 or our 800 number, 800-833-2900. Text the word HOPE to 20121. Those who want to call in related to grief, just dial us at the same numbers, 211. Then also the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline for anyone outside of Contra Costa. Dial that national line, 1-800-273-TALK, the letters TALK, or that refers, or those are the same as the digits of 8255. There's also a national crisis text line. You can text anything to the digits of 741-741. Now I want to talk about the different kinds of crisis or suicide calls that we receive. Now, certainly, we're a suicide and crisis line, so people call in related to suicide. What I want to underscore, certainly the individual who might have thoughts of suicide and might be at one level or another related to attempting suicide, and whether that's low risk, moderate risk, high risk. So there's the individual, certainly can call in anytime, 24 hours a day, to our line, to the national line. But then also, people can feel free to call if you are concerned about someone else. If you're concerned about your son or your daughter, or your husband or your wife or your spouse or your partner or your friend, and you wonder how to be helpful, call us, call the national line, and we'll coach you on how to help them. So that's a third-party call. Now then also, people can call in related to crisis or grief, and that is not related to suicide. A lot of people are in crisis, they're in a moment, and they need someone to talk to, and maybe they don't feel comfortable talking to the people around them. Or maybe the people around them aren't quite as supportive as anyone would hope they would be, or at least it doesn't feel that way to the person who is in crisis. So that's part of why these crisis lines exist, or also potentially why your own lines there in your church exist, to be there in moments to help people. Then there are some folks who, well, again, let me go back to crisis grief. It can be third party or concerned about someone else, and maybe they possibly have some significant mental health concerns, and you wonder how to be helpful to them. Again, that category of folks is also free to call our lines. Then there are some folks who call us on a continuing basis, maybe for a moment in their lives. It's not just once and done, but it's call and then call again. Feel free. We're here 24 hours a day, day or night, to be able to help folks. 211 Info and Referral. It's about local health and social services. We have a great big database, all of the different 211 services. It exists in most of California, not everywhere. It exists in most of the United States, not everywhere. But it's our job to know what's out there to help people. Again, here in Contra Costa, all you got to do is dial 211. All you got to do is text us. That database of 1,500 different programs is available anytime, 24 hours a day, online, 211cc.org. Also, a 211 line is about providing information in time of community disaster, whether that's the hurricanes or the earthquakes or the tornadoes or all of these tragedies, or even now, the COVID pandemic. People are calling, and that's great. We know what's out there, what's available, what's open. Where are the food pantries? Where are those meals? Here in California, what about that meal program for the restaurants for the senior citizens? Call us. We now have that information, or rental assistance or other needs, 211, either here at Contra Costa or around the nation. Here are some of the cards, and that's actually a poster, if for those of you able to see. We have wallet cards. Write to us at our website. Go to our website or write to me, and we can get you some wallet cards to distribute to family, friends, people in your community. All right, now I want to start in on suicide prevention briefly, quickly, and certainly not enough time. We want to, I'm showing a slide right now that says proceed with caution. I want to echo what Bill said a few moments ago, and I want to amplify that I want to recognize, acknowledge that this is a difficult topic. And perhaps some of the people listening right now, or perhaps some of the folks who will yet listen to this on a future occasion, that the topic of suicide has touched our lives. Maybe we ourselves have had thoughts of suicide. Maybe we ourselves have attempted suicide. Maybe we know someone who has had thoughts of suicide. Maybe we know someone who has attempted suicide. Maybe we know folks for whom this has been a subject in their family. Maybe we know folks who have died by suicide and it has affected us. So even now, while I'm speaking or the other speakers are presenting, this can be painful. And I want to acknowledge that. And if you are on your own, certainly you can take a breath, step aside, give us a call at the national line or the local lines here at Contra Costa. Call the church lines that you've already seen. We need to take care of ourselves at every moment, and certainly while we're talking about a difficult topic. So I just want to acknowledge that. If any of you all are watching this in a group setting, I hope that everyone can be supportive to one another. It can be painful. Oops, I think I went the wrong way. Language, I had presented just those phone numbers again. All right, for those watching the PowerPoint. Language of suicide awareness. Talk about the topic, absolutely. But we want to talk about it in a way that reduces stigma, reduces the sense that people might possibly feel judged. So we want to be sensitive to that. I want to propose some language. I don't expect us to modify our language overnight or even to agree. That's fine. So often there's the phrasing of commit suicide. We want to I want to suggest trying to avoid that language, because sometimes that committing, when I've thought about commit, is always about something negative. When we have a direct object following that verb of commit, I can't think of anything that's positive that's a direct object that follows commit. Now, I'm not here to promote suicide. I'm just here to make it easier to talk about it when we have thoughts of suicide or when we have experienced a suicide of someone that we know and care about. Or there's the phrasing, sometimes, believe it or not, I hear it in the news, that, it has been a successful suicide attempt. Oh, it is not a success. Well, I mean, it's a success if they had the goal, it seems, for the moment, of attempting suicide, and then they died. So in that regard, it's a success. But no, it's not a success, it's a death. but it's hard to avoid that language. So we want to say died by suicide, completed suicide, the suicide attempt ended in death, anything to avoid that word of success in this context. Suicide loss survivor, those who are alive after someone else has died by suicide. They are survivors, and they have their struggles and pain. And it may even actually be triggering for folks who are alive after someone else. Someone is in a higher risk category if they know someone who has died by suicide, and that other suicide has affected them. So they are survivors. They're also suicide attempt survivors. That's great. I can tell you there are many, many suicide attempt survivors. That is, they've attempted suicide and they're still alive. That's great. That's wonderful, and we want to help them and support them. Statistics from the Crisis Center. What I find very interesting, so in our fiscal year of 2018 and 2019, that we marked in our call records that there were 2,900 calls related to the topic of suicide. Of those, we rated the vast majority of them at low risk. Then some of them, over 200 of them, at moderate risk, very low number that we rated at high risk for attempting suicide. And then of those, most of those, we helped them to get to the psychiatric emergency room to help them to stay safe. But what I find interesting is that so many are at low risk. And what does that tell us? That we need a place and a space for people to talk about what is difficult in their lives, the pain, and perhaps even those thoughts of suicide. So looking at myths. So there's a myth out there. Asking or talking about suicide will give someone the idea to do it. Sometimes people think that they don't want to bring up the topic. They don't want to ask about suicide because they're afraid they might plant the seed. We believe to the contrary. If we actually believe that to be true, we wouldn't be here. We are here to talk about it, and that it's good to talk about it so that people can have a space and place to look at what's going on in their lives. Another myth. People who attempt suicide want to die, and there's nothing you can do about it. Certainly, we don't believe that to be true in what we do here. But it's interesting, when I first heard this sentence of people who attempt suicide want to die, I thought, well, of course they want to die. That's why they're attempting suicide. But it's not that they want to die. That's not their first goal. It's not that they really want to be dead. It's that they want the pain to end. It's about the pain. It's not about the death. So if we can help people in their pain, if we can help end the pain, or if we can help reduce the pain, or if we can help people to endure the pain, or if we can accompany people in their pain, then that can help. Another myth. You should ignore people who threaten or attempt suicide looking for attention. Sometimes some folks in frustration think, no, I don't believe you. You're just saying that. You're just being dramatic. But I think we need to be like the TSA at any airport in line there, the Transportation Safety Association Administration, that there are signs there that you don't get to joke about bombs and you don't get to joke about knives. And if someone does, they will pull you aside and talk to you for hours on end, and you will miss your flight or worse. So also, when anyone talks about suicide or drops any hints, we want to pick up on that and respond to that and talk about it directly, ask about it directly. Finally here, another myth. Suicide usually occurs without warning. Actually, someone came up with 80% of the time there's some sign. Now that's supposed to be a positive, that if we can be aware of the signs and learn how to respond, then we can be helpful. Now, even as I say that, I always want to be sensitive to those who've lost someone to suicide. Probably most everyone who has lost a loved one to suicide feels some sense of self-blame or guilt, like they missed the signs, they should have said something, they should have done something, they should have done more, said more. I think that it can happen that even when we do all that we can do, regrettably, sometimes the difficulties overpower, sadly. So we always want to be sensitive to those who have lost someone to suicide. Let me move on. So here is a picture of the full trifold that we produced last fall during Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. And we're going to look at each of these categories related to suicide prevention. Look for the signs. Listen for signs of thoughts of suicide. Ask directly about thoughts of suicide. Express care. Reach out. and follow up. I like very much these steps. We're going to look at each of these a little bit more, just a little bit more. Here's another slide that shows that listed out there in the far column. Let's move on here. I need to move something on my computer. Just a moment, please, if I can do the, oops, it's not working. I don't think I'll be able to move it. All right, I'm going to move back here. So we're looking at what to look for: hopelessness, withdrawing from loved ones, changes in mood or behavior, giving away prized belongings, and there is much more. But we want to look for any signs that someone may be struggling. We want to listen for verbal clues. People drop hints. Someone says, I just can't go on. Someone says, it will all be over soon. Someone says, no one would care if I were gone. I'd be better off dead. All of my problems will be over soon. I wish I could just go to sleep and never wake up. These are just some of the clues, and it's our task to use these as invitations to ask directly about suicide. Now, I want to comment. Sometimes people say, oh, no one would care if I were gone. I just said that. I just want to amplify this. Someone would say, I'd be better off dead. And sometimes there might be a tendency for someone to get into a debate or an argument, and someone says, oh, no one would care. And then a loving person says, oh, well, I would care, and you've got friends. And they say, no, you don't. Or they say, no, I don't. Yes, you do. No, you don't. Oh, they're fake friends, whatever. The goal is not to enter into a debate. The goal is to use this as an invitation to ask directly about thoughts of suicide, and also to empathize. Empathize with the feelings of loneliness or isolation or rejection, and to be accepting of that. Let me move on. I'm looking at my clock here, and I've got to march on. Asking directly about thoughts of suicide. It's good to put it in a context to reflect back that we understand, gee, you're going through a tough time. Let's say, I'm just making this up. You've just been dumped by your girlfriend, your boyfriend, and you're feeling rejected. And sometimes when people go through something like that, they have thoughts of suicide. So that's not so uncommon. So I want to ask you, do you have thoughts of suicide? Now let me move on. So express care. I'm here for you. Provide active listening. Express empathy. Stay calm, if at all possible. Remain patient. Be comfortable with uncertainty. Our goal is not to fix everything overnight. And be comfortable also with the pain, with painful situations. We want to help people stay alive so that they can then address all of the different concerns and issues. Believe in the capacity for change. I suspect that this audience here does indeed believe in the capacity for change. So then reach out. Let's find help for you. And let's make sure you stay safe. There is an app that you can download onto a smartphone. It's called Safety Plan. So I'm showing it right now on the PowerPoint. You can download that anytime. There's another app called My3, another safety plan. These have steps for how to keep ourselves safe. We don't have time to go through it all now. There are 6 steps that were developed by this pair known as Stanley and Brown. Warning signs, being aware of when we're having a difficult time. Internal coping strategies. What can we do ourselves alone that might help us to feel better? Social contacts, interactions. What can we do around people? What can we do with people that might help us to feel better? Who are family or friends to whom we can reach out and talk in a deeper way? Who are professionals and agencies and churches and leaders and pastors and pastoral associates and all of that who can help us? How can we make our environment safe? Put away anything dangerous. And what is my reason to live? What keeps me going? Write this out in better moments and look back at it in more difficult moments. Then we want to follow up with those people who are at risk. Can we talk again? Call, text, message, chat, Zoom, etc. Or visit, if that's possible now and legal during the pandemic time. Here's the card again, just summarizing for those again following the PowerPoint. I'm going to march on. Third party, I already addressed this. I'll just say again quickly that if you're concerned about someone else, feel free to call the crisis line or the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, and we'll help you to help the other person. Protective factors. Let me just, I'm going to have to gloss over this, but what helps people? Right now I've been talking about, I think, what helps one-on-one in interactions, but also let's look at what helps in the wider community or society. If there is effective clinical care for mental health, physical health, substance abuse, or we would say spiritual health, if that exists in a community, and if it's easy to get to that, that helps. If there's easy access to the variety of clinical interventions or to support, again, through church and community, ongoing relationships with people who are supportive, ongoing relationships with medical care, mental health care service providers, strong connections to family and community support. Sometimes people don't have that. We want to help people to build that into their lives. Support for help seeking. When someone says they're in need, we say, okay, let's get you help. Someone says, I'm still getting help. That's great. And I hope that that works for you. Restricted access to highly lethal means of suicide. So if someone has a gun right there at their side and they have thoughts of suicide, obviously it's not a good combination. Skills in problem solving, conflict resolution, nonviolent handling of disputes, so that when there's difficulty, to find a way through that that is not violent toward oneself, not violent toward others. Cultural and religious beliefs that discourage suicide and encourage self-preservation. And that is a faith basis for life. Now, this is great and wonderful, and I just want to acknowledge one of the challenges is that sometimes when people are in a community that has a strong value toward life, when they might struggle, when they might have thoughts of suicide, then they might feel hesitant to come forward about that. So we just want to be as sensitive as possible to be welcoming to people even in their struggles while holding the values that we hold. Certainly want to encourage people to develop high self-esteem and be a part of that. And here we are. I think I'm coming to the end of my PowerPoint. Once again, here, phone numbers, and there it is. And I think that I now get to invite Graham to speak to us.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Scott. And my goodness, that 20 minutes sure goes by quickly, doesn't it? All right. Well, if you can unshare your screen, I'll pop mine up.
Right.
All right.
Sharing.
Very good. There we go. Okay. And, the thing about Zoom is what we often lose here is that interaction, right? A raised eyebrow, a smile, a frown, which makes it difficult for us sometimes as presenters. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to actually take that photograph that Scott had behind him, for those of you online, and take you to a different beach. So this beach is on the east coast of Florida. It is January 3rd, 2014, about 5:15, 5:20 in the morning. Sun's not up, but there's a light drizzle falling, which is great because that's keeping people off the beach. And what I'm doing there is trying to figure out why, what, who, how did what did I miss? What's going on? And at that very moment, my phone rings. Actually, it's a text coming in. And I thought, who on earth is texting me at this hour? And don't they know what day this is? Well, the text started out, hello, Mr. Wiseman, you don't know me, but I remember what you said. And what proceeded after that was I had a nice long conversation with a young lady that I had never met. And we texted back and forth for over an hour. And she had found herself sinking in a well. And she felt that the light at the top, that small circle of light, got smaller and smaller and was closing off. And even though her parents were reaching down, it wasn't enough. She was at risk for suicide. And at the end of that talk or text, I asked her when she had been there. And she said, well, just now. And she had remembered something I had said the year before, which was when you're feeling desperate, when you're feeling depressed, like no one cares, hang on. There's people you haven't even met that love you. Give them a chance to help you and reach out. That was just a few words. And those few words changed my life and hers. As I stood on that beach, I ended our text conversation. I took a picture of this sunrise. And I thought it was only by the grace of God that I happened to have my phone with me at 5:30 in the morning. And I responded to that text message because you see, it was 2:30 in the morning back here. And where she had been when she heard me speak was at my son's funeral. And this is my son, Colin. I wish you could have met him. He was a wonderful, wonderful young man. And when we had his funeral, there was over 1,000 people showed up. People he didn't know loved him. Yeah. Well, that's why I speak. All right. So like Scott, I'm going to tip on a couple topics here. For those people who are in a big hurry, I have How to Be a Perfect Parent. That's really a great slide. Just take a picture with your phone and then you can go on and enjoy the rest of the evening. I talk about SAD, stress, anxiety, and depression, and what's changed. What is going on with our teenagers, right? And this is all without throwing in the extra salt of the COVID-19 shelter in place. Figuring out what's important to our kids, and then mental health for life. All right, so here they are. These are the instructions for the perfect parent. Make sure your child's academic, emotional, psychological, mental, spiritual, physical, nutritional, and social needs are met while being careful not to overstimulate, understimulate, and properly medicate. Okay, is this really how you raise a child? No. But this is what we hear. This is what people say, well, you do this and you'll have a perfect child. So I asked my dad, I'm one of 5 kids. I asked my dad, hey, how did you raise 5 pretty good kids? He goes, well, you just don't forget to feed them. Now, we can stay with kind of the surface level of that, but he also included feeding us spiritually, feeding us emotionally, so that we would grow up to be fine young adults. So feeding is critical, all right? All right, so there's something called the California Healthy Kids Survey, and I use it a lot. This is given to 7th, 9th, and 11th graders throughout the state, and it asks them a series of questions about who's home when you get home, do you feel safe at school, are you connected to your teacher, and so on. But I always go to a different section, and I go where they ask this question: during the past 12 months, did you ever feel so sad or hopeless almost every day for 2 weeks or more that you stopped doing your usual activities? What that question is really asking is, are you depressed? So the state average is 33% of students tick that box. But over in Mount Diablo Unified, which some of your students may be at, 51% of the junior girls tick that box. So that means if you're out front, or if you're watching a girls' basketball game, as they run down the court, you can go depressed, not depressed, depressed, not depressed. That's a startling number, and it's going up. Now, males are at 27%, but that's going up as well. The follow-up question is, during the past 12 months, did you ever consider seriously attempting suicide? In the state, 15.5% of our students tick that box. In Akalani's district, 20% of the students tick that box. That's 1 in 5. 1 in 5. All right, well, these are tough statistics. So in the United States, in college, the number 1 cause of death is accident. The number 2 cause of death is suicide. In high school, the number 1 cause of death is accident. The number 2 cause of death is suicide. And for the first time ever, the number 1 cause of death in middle school is accident. And the number 2 cause of death is suicide. So it's the highest it's been in 40 years, and it's continuing to go up. But there is some good news. The good news is the United States is one of only 3 countries where it's actually going up. Other countries are doing or have action in place that's affecting us in a positive way. So in the United Kingdom, they were able to reduce their suicide rate by 3% in just 2 years. And you might ask, how'd they do that? Well, there's a handsome young couple you may have heard of, Will and Kate, and they got a little brother, Harry, that used to help them. But anyway, they decided to come out and share their mental health struggles. And so when the royal family is saying, I really had a tough time when my mother died, and it was a very public mourning and grieving process. But actually for William, what's really affected him is being an air ambulance pilot and landing in the middle of people's worst day. And that's really affected him as he goes through life. His wife, Kate, she's focusing on schools and how to help children address their mental health needs, because often kids don't have the vocabulary to say what they really feel. There's been some legislative updates, AB 2246, which has schools actually making a plan on prevention, intervention, and then postvention for suicide loss of a student. So schools are taking notice. And so that begs the question, is it just stress? Well, this is where, if we were all in the same room, I'd say, hey, show of hands, who says it's stress is bad? Okay. Who says stress is good? Well, it's not good or bad. Stress just is. We evolved using stress. It raises our eustress levels. And, if we're going to go on the field and we're on the court and try and score a basket, taking a test, this is very helpful. It's useful to have stress. The problem is when this stress becomes chronic. So for those of you who can see the slide, I have the signs and symptoms of teen anxiety. I'll draw your attention to this because performance at school, at sporting events is very important to them. Being on time. They worry about earthquakes and catastrophic events, but they want to be perfectionists. And they may redo things that aren't perfect the first time through. And they'll spend an excessive amount of time on homework and strive for approval. But here's the rub. We reward students that worry about their grades, are perfectionists, and strive for approval. So we're actually reinforcing that behavior of teen anxiety. Now, this next slide is a little bit on teen depression. And these are things that actually if we had more time, I would go into more depth on them. But for me, the number one thing to look for is sleep. If your student or child is not sleeping, or they're up at 3 in the morning, that's a warning sign. Something is not right, and you really do need to address it. Bring in a professional or seek counseling. All right, so here's something else that's going on for our kids. Pre-COVID-19, I speak in high schools a lot, and typically freshmen. And year before last, I spoke to almost 9,000 high school students. And I would ask them the question, what's going on? What year of high school is the most stressful? And they would all say the same thing. It's the junior year. So we ask, what's going on your junior year? Well, you've got your SAT, the ACT, the LMNOP. You've got your 12 AP courses. So what does AP stand for? You're right, academic pressure. So you've got your 12 AP courses, your 4.95 GPA average, your captain of the girls and boys volleyball team, all because someone told you the only way you're going to be successful in life is to go to one of these 11 schools here. Now, as adults, we know that's not true. But our students, our kids are hearing this from all avenues, that if you don't go to one of these schools, and for those of you who are on the phone, I've got Michigan, Harvard, Yale, MIT, Cal, Penn State, Columbia, USC, Stanford. So I am not opposed to these schools in any way. My dad had a full 4-year scholarship to Columbia University, and then he went on and got another degree at Harvard. So I would ask the question, do you think that I got a lot of pressure to go to Columbia or Harvard? Well, the answer is no. Because remember, I told you my dad's a smart guy. He knew that wasn't the right thing for me. That wasn't the right thing for me at all. In fact, none of us kids went to any of those Ivy League schools. But I'm bringing up a sweatshirt now for the University of Wisconsin. And the reason being, Google used to say, and by the way, that's a cute little startup out on the peninsula. You might want to keep an eye on them. Google used to say that we only want to hire from these schools. We want the best of the best, the cream of the cream. And what they started to realize was that these actually weren't that good at being employees. And so at science fairs, they started to notice that not only was MIT and Yale and USC there, but also the University of Wisconsin. Because you see, all those kids trying to get into Stanford, what they don't realize is every year Stanford turns away 70,000 perfect Stanford students. Where do they go? Maybe the University of Wisconsin. And every year Stanford graduates some amazing academic professors. But those curmudgeon-y old professors at Stanford aren't dying off fast enough, so they have to go work somewhere else, like University of Wisconsin. So you have Stanford quality students instructed by Stanford quality professors doing better than Stanford at these shows. Part of it is just that these are students who have realized that instead of trying to fit their dreams into what people call a dream school, they're looking for the school that fits their dreams. And that's really a big deal. It really is. And for some of them, it might be trade school. When I'm talking to high school students and I ask them, what do you think a starting journeyman electrician gets in San Francisco? They go, oh, I don't know, 40,000, maybe 50. Well, it's 116,000 starting. Not bad considering they paid you to learn the trade, and you probably retire at 55 with a full set of benefits. So not a bad way to go. All right. So what's stressing them out? Fear of failure, tougher academics, social pressures, uncertainty about the future. What can we do to help them? Well, can encourage a healthy diet, make sure they exercise, get better sleep, get a pet. Wait a minute. Eat well, exercise, and sleep. Haven't we heard that before? Well, yes, we have. And you know why? Because it really works. Sleep is the #1 thing to help get our students back on track. And by the way, if you get your high school student a pet, guess who else got the pet? You did. All right. So let's talk about sleep. Stanford Sleep Center said that teenagers should be getting 9.1 hours of sleep a night. And only 15% of our teens actually get that. So in my own studies, when I'm, experienced rather at schools, the average in Mount Diablo is about 6.5 hours of sleep. So that means half the kids are getting less than that. So it affects their memory, their ability to focus. It actually mentally handicaps them as they go in, because at Stanford, what they pointed out was for every hour of sleep, you drop your IQ about 10 points. So if you have an average IQ of 100 and you miss 4 hours of sleep, you're down there around 60. And that's why school's so hard and frustrating and difficult. So sleep is the #1 thing that can really, really help our kids out. All right, so let's keep going. I'm going to talk a little bit about a survey out of UCLA, and then what emotional currency is, and then walking alongside. Okay, so discovering your student's emotional currency. I'm hoping that you've heard of this term before. And what it is let's establish what's of value to your child. There was something that came out of the University of Colorado Boulder back in the 70s, actually. It was a sales technique called Who You Are is Where You Were When. And it's even more important today than it was back then. So let's use me as an example. The rest of the sentence is, the type of person you are is what was going on when you were 10 years old. So when I was 10 years old, the United States had just tucked tail and pulled out of Vietnam. The Arabs shut off the oil in what we call the Arab oil embargo, and gasoline prices went up 480% in 1 week. We had to ration our gas. It wasn't all bad. We also founded the EPA to help look out for our environment, and we've made some wonderful changes in that too. But that affects me. So how does that affect me? Well, friends will come over and they're like, Graham, why do you have 2 gallons of milk? Or better yet, you know what? If I updated that, why do you have 12 pallets of toilet paper? Because they might shut off a commodity. You never know when they're going to shut off the toilet paper vein. Unfortunately, I don't have 12 pallets of toilet paper. But think about kids who are growing up now. Think about kids who are 10 now. What are they going to think about? How are they going to be affected by what we're all experiencing with this shelter in place, economic uncertainty, the fear of an invisible enemy, right? Boy, there's a lot going on. I know kids who are now 18, 19 years old now. They're the ones who went through the economic collapse of 2008. So they don't buy cars. Only a sucker would buy that. They don't buy homes. They just rent because they know that they saw their parents who did everything right and their retirement collapsed, their house was repossessed, and they had that trauma to live with. So there's a lot going on. And it's up to us as we look at our students and our children going through this now to help kind of alleviate that. But let's go back to that emotional currency. What's of value to a student now? So UCLA ran this study for quite a long time. It started in 1967. And they asked high school students to stack rank these 16 attributes. And there are things like power, self-acceptance, physical fitness, hedonism, a community feeling. Now, community feeling actually was first place. 1 year dropped down to second, then went back to first. It was the most important thing for high school students. But then in 2007, everything changed. And the most important thing for students was fame, followed by achievement and popularity. That's it. If what you're trying to work with your child on doesn't make them famous or popular, you have something that has no value, no emotional currency for them. So where are they getting this from? Well, who's this guy? So on the screen, I have a picture of a handsome young man with kind of a smirk on his face walking in. Maybe this will give you a better idea. So this is an arena packed, and there in the middle is a video game. Yeah, you see, that young man is known as Demon, and he plays esports. He's 19 years old. He's already made $3.3 million playing video games. So when your kid says, I want to be a millionaire, and I'm not going to Harvard, I'm going to go play video games, that's where this message is coming from. It'll make him famous and popular. Okay, how about this young lady? I have a very attractive young lady here, and there she is on the cover of Forbes magazine. And she is Kylie Jenner, purportedly the first female self-made billionaire in the United States. And how'd she do that? Well, by being famous and popular. So there's another example of setting that emotional currency for our students and children. Oh, look, there's that sleep one again. It must be important. It is important because sleep really can help so much. It really can. So let's look at this. Now this slide shows, let's say that's me, my wife, and my daughter, and we're walking down a path towards a fog. What's ahead? I don't know. You don't know. It's the future, right? We had no idea our son would go ahead. But here we are, still on the path. And Scott, I did take advantage of the grief services you had at Contra Costa Crisis, so I can recommend that. All right, so this is walking alongside, not in front, knocking down all the obstacles, not hovering above. Make sure they can be pulled. Excuse me. Excuse me. But walking alongside, sharing the life together. Because you see someone who's struggling with something like anxiety, depression, or suicide ideation, they're like a broken table. That one leg is too short, and they can't build a life on that unstable platform. So it's up to us to find something, a wedge, to put under there to support that leg so that they can build a successful life. And to do that, we have to listen. Listen not to respond, but just to support. Don't play the blame game, and that's blaming one spouse over the other, right? We're all in this together. Be evenly yoked as parents. Pull together and support your child. All right, so I have a slide here that says ways to connect, and I left it in because this is, of course, pre-pandemic. So, sporting events, nope. Drive time, not so much. Family meal time, had enough. TV viewing, way too much. But here at the top was the one that I always stressed, and that's making your home comfortable for their friends. Making it a safe place for them to share and relax. Because often the friends will tell you what your child is struggling with before your child will. All right, so this slide has a lot of words on it, and it breaks my rule, which is 5 bullet points, 5 lines, 5 words. But it's titled in 3 columns: what they say, what they want, and what they need. And what they say is, look, everybody has a bad day now and again. Let us have a bad day. Stop looking at our grades every day. Things go up and down. And I've got so much to do, it's unbelievable. What they want is us to teach them time management. How to effectively use that time so that they can keep that 9 hours of sleep. And they want to please us as parents. So what do they need? They need to know that they're going to be okay. And at a time like this, that's even more important, that we talk about emerging from this, how things will be okay. And societies have gone through many crises before and will continue to go through them afterwards. This is just the one we're dealing with right now. But the most important thing they need is to know that they're lovable. Not that they're loved by you, but they're lovable to other people. That's a really important thing. All right, so I started with a few words. I'm ending with a few words. Out of University of Michigan, they ran a study, and it was about wellness centers. And wellness centers are not a new phenomenon. They've been around for 40 years on school campuses, but mostly in big cities. And so what they did is they had their study published in February 2019 in the JAMA Psychiatry magazine. All right, so they took teens 13 to 17 years old who'd been hospitalized for suicide attempt or suicide ideation. So these are kids really at risk. And they asked them to select a caring adult. Parents, it's usually not us. So the students selected a caring adult. And the caring adult's only training was, here are some very strong indicators of suicide ideation. If you see them, call us. That was it. They made a phone call once a week to these young people. The population was 448 students. The study ran for about 12 years, and it pulled students from the University Psychiatric Hospital or other private psychiatric hospitals in the US. So 12 years later, what they found was they had reduced the death rate by 660%. That is amazing. 660%. Remember, I was telling you, it's the #2 cause of death in college, high school, and middle school. Can you imagine how many lives that would save if we had those caring adults? And where are they? Wellness centers, right? So I went over a lot tonight. I think I'm just about out of time, but what I want you to do is just think about some of the things that we talked about here tonight, both Scott and afterwards with Melanie, who's coming up next, and find your nugget. What piece of gold did you hear tonight or see on a slide that you're like, yes, I can use that. And here's how I'm going to use it, okay? So when you find that, I want you to go out and make a change, okay? We can all make a change. When we lost our son, boy, what a life-destroying event that was, okay? Shook everything up for all of us. But out of that, we've survived and started to work. So we put out a mental health awareness license plate. Probably going to be held off this year because of the coronavirus. It's SB 1223. But next year, it'll be up. We'll be out seeking support. What will this do? This will raise funds for those wellness centers and put them in our schools and help our kids. All right. So that's it for me. I'm not going to take any questions right now. I am going to hand it over to Melanie. Let me unshare my screen.
Okay, looks good.
Yeah.
Well, I'm Melanie, everybody, and I'm so glad to join this important event. And I just have to say, I'm so humbled by Scott and Graham's investment in youth and, well, in society in general. And it's just, I was taking notes just like any other participant. So I'm really grateful to hear all that good information, such good practical information. So I'm going to do my best here to bring something new and meaningful to the end as well. I'm joining this panel as a practitioner of Christian Science. Bill talked a little bit about Christian Science at the beginning, and I will too, but really, basically, all you need to know about that for now is that my full-time job is taking prayer requests. And both in that role and just in my everyday life role as a mom of 3 teens, I've just become increasingly aware of just the growing stresses and challenges and difficulties that kids and teens and young adults today face. It's not like when I was a teenager. And so just to respond to that tonight, to address that, I'd like to talk about ideas that stir something in us and move us forward, sometimes before we're even aware of it. You know, when I think of diffusing teen stress or addressing depression or even addressing suicidal tendencies, I can't help but talk about what I have found to be a good antidote to that. And that is ideas that change the way we feel about ourselves for the better. Ideas that change the way that we feel about our lives and that bring us a sense of purpose. You know, we heard earlier this evening, I think it was from Graham, we heard that suicide is the leading cause of death among high school and the second leading cause of death among high school and college kids and even middle school kids now. Why is that? Well, the two of them gave us a pretty good indication of what's going on, but the kids are just facing such a preponderance of decisions to be made. Yes, opportunities, but also difficulties and challenges. And when all of that happens, our life can start to feel small or feel like maybe we're running out of options. I mean, for example, if a college kid feels like his only two options are to keep pushing through a hard major that he doesn't really like and has just become kind of stressful and not very much fun, or drop that, switch majors, but then disappoint everybody in his family. You know, if he feels like those are the only two options that he has, he can start to feel kind of desperate or even act irrationally. And, you know, when we feel like things are closing in like that, it's difficult. Our lives feel increasingly small and we kind of lose perspective. We lose sight of the good that we have to offer others, or we lose sight of the good that life is offering us. And my daughter found herself in that position, exactly in that position a few years ago. And for a period of about 2 years, she struggled with thoughts of suicide. And I have to admit, we had signs. There were people outside of our family, you know, coaches, teachers, other parents even, that would occasionally get in touch with me and say that my daughter had done something that was concerning, or her behavior or something that she said was suspicious and looked concerning to them. Well, she was a high achieving student. That might not be a surprise based on what we've been hearing about earlier tonight. She was a high achieving student, but I think she had convinced herself that life didn't really allow her to be happy and relaxed and successful at the same time. And she was going to choose successful. So she was putting tremendous pressure on herself. I think she felt like if she took her foot off the gas for just an instant, she'd lose everything that she had worked so hard to build, and maybe lose her status as a high achieving student. And I learned something from, I think it was Graham that said earlier, and I think that means parents and teachers, kind of unwittingly reward that behavior. And I think I might have been doing that. I didn't know I was doing that, but I think I might have fallen into that trap. So when I was thinking about what my daughter was doing, I noticed that she was putting tremendous pressure on herself. And then she started bullying others. And that was really a red flag. That was immediate cause for concern. She was moody and irritable and spent most of her free time alone. Her dad and I, of course, tried to reach out to her during this time, and we really wanted to do that. But most of the conversations that we had with her did not go very well. In fact, they ended with her yelling, "I hate my life," and storming off to her room. There were tears and anger frequently, but we just couldn't seem to break through that kind of wall of beliefs that she had about herself and her life and her kind of limited options, it seemed like. Well, I have to admit, I was thrown by having a daughter with suicidal tendencies. I mean, I had not planned for that. No one does. No one ever expects that, I don't think. And I also thought that my husband and I were doing everything right already. But, you know, apparently just having a loving home or even a loving family, at least in our case, was not enough to shelter my daughter from the fears that she had about a future, the stresses that she had right then in the moment. I was really on strange new ground as a parent. I think my husband felt the same way. But we felt like we had something reliable and reassuring that we could turn to, and that was God. I know that word evokes something a little bit different in each one of us, so I'm just going to say tonight to just explain where I'm coming from a little bit. I'm not thinking of God as a superhuman figure that makes arbitrary decisions about our lives, you know, that blesses some people but not others, or some situations but not others. The Bible, especially the New Testament, puts forward a view of God as divine love, you know, just as love itself, or as infinite mind, the source of the ideas that I'm talking about tonight, or just a loving presence that's a very practical help in times of trouble, both, you know, grand scale trouble like a pandemic, or individual crises, just this loving presence that's there. Well, that Bible-based notion of God as an infinite loving source of ideas is especially important or helpful, I would say, in times that we feel stuck. And I think that's just how my daughter felt. You know, and I could see it in her. I recognized the feelings that she was having, the frustration, just the weight, I think, that she was feeling on her, because I had felt like that myself when I was in college, particularly when I was in grad school. I had struggled with depression and certainly ongoing stress. And so I felt like I could help her. When I was a grad student, I found freedom, or I found release from those kind of self-destructive feelings that I was having from turning to God and getting some ideas from God. And so I felt like I could help her the same way. So now, years later, as a parent, I took great comfort in a Bible verse that I found, and I'm going to share it with you all. I'm paraphrasing here. I'm not going to say it exactly here, but it's a translation anyway, right? So I'll just do my best here. In Psalms, it says something like, well, and I have to say again, my daughter's life was feeling small and closed in. And the Psalm I read said something like, "In my distress, I cried out to God. He heard me and he set me in a spacious place." I love the imagery of that. You know, he set me in a spacious place. If you're feeling closed in and limited and small, a spacious place sounds pretty appealing. Now, of course, this place is mental. You know, I mean, it's not like her bedroom was going to get bigger or something. She might have liked that, but that's not what we were talking about here, of course. That what needed to grow there was her sense of herself, her sense of the opportunities, her sense of self-worth, and her thoughts about how she could share with others. I love, and one of you said this earlier, I can't remember if it was Graham or Scott, I wrote it down. I think it was Graham, showing the kids that not just that you love them, but that they're lovable. I mean, I love that. I can just feel the energy behind that, and the thought shifting love, of course, that is behind that idea. So I really felt like her thoughts about her potential and how she could help others too needed to grow. And so that was the tack that her dad and I took in helping her. Well, so besides taking basic precautions that I think many parents would take in this situation, really trying to keep her from harming herself. Scott had said this, let's make sure you're safe, that we were really trying to do that with her. Besides taking those basic precautions, we prayed deeply during this time. I know prayer is another one of those words that, you know, evokes something a little different in each one of us. I'm not thinking of prayer as a certain set of words or surface level actions. Although there might be many people that are watching and listening tonight that have prayers that they've memorized that are very meaningful to them, and that's great. I mean, maybe the Lord's Prayer or some Bible verses or something from a sacred text. Maybe something you saw online that's inspiring, or a song you learned when you were little. I mean, those are great. But when I use the word prayer today, I'm thinking about an even broader definition. It's really anything that helps us tune into the ideas that are coming to us from God, from love itself, and helps us tune out fear and distraction. Prayer is humility. You know, it's I think anybody that's tried to pray understands that. And I'm talking about myself praying here. I wasn't putting this on my daughter. I was just finding ways that I could pray that were helpful to me. Humility was big. I think a lot of times we sit down with the intention of talking to God and then end up, as we move along, humbly listening to God. Prayer is, it's a willingness to agree with the ideas that are coming to us from God and not getting too caught up in a superficial view of things. We all have something good and godlike to find within ourselves and bring out and share with others. But to really know that, I mean, especially for a troubled teen or youth or anybody really, to know and trust that takes a shift in thought. I mean, it takes a change in our outlook. How do we do that? The Bible book of Genesis talks about how God made everything and it was completely good. Well, that includes us. And to me, that means that the core lasting identity of any one of us is as the expression of God, as the expression of God's goodness. You know, we're so much more than just a chunk of matter that eats and breathes and, you know, tries to get a certain grade point average or tries to make the team or tries not to miss the deadline. We're something so much more significant than that. And an expression of God is just naturally peaceful and joyful and ready to help or ready to be helped, open. Those are qualities that we can appreciate. And so as I prayed for my daughter, I really stuck with simple affirmations about the identity that I knew she had. You know, in the New Testament, Jesus talks about the kingdom of heaven. And that, to me, that is the understanding of God, the communion we have with God that enables us to feel healthy and joyful and having a sense of dominion, you know, feeling good about ourselves. What does Jesus say about the kingdom of heaven? Well, he says it's within. And so as I was praying, I was really wanting to affirm God-given qualities of my daughter that I knew were within her, but that I just wasn't seeing, or nobody seemed to be seeing too much then. I mean, yes, she was smart. Yes, she was very driven and capable. Well, we all could see that. But those qualities in that moment weren't helping her feel better about herself or her life. And I wanted to see some of the softer qualities. You know, I wanted to see creativity and beauty and sensitivity and a genuine caring for others. I wanted to see some of those qualities coming out in her. And as I prayed along those lines, I began to see something wonderful. I mean, I began to understand more that her core identity, her spiritual blueprint, really, did not include bullying behavior or any of the ugly behaviors that she was having. Now, I'm not being naive. I don't mean that she was not bullying others, because she was, but I could tell that behavior was not part of her permanent identity. That brought such a release for me. That was really helpful. It kind of took the sting out of some of the phone calls that I would get from other parents reporting her bad behavior. I wasn't overlooking it, but I mean, I was recognizing that it didn't have to have the fearful hold on me that it had. It was something that she and I could work through. That was helpful. My daughter already had a connection with divine love. I mean, we all do. She just needed to feel it tangibly. I needed to see it a little bit more. Well, again, as I prayed along those lines, a wonderful shift in me took place and my own fear began to recede. I don't mean that the situation changed overnight, because it didn't. I mean, we were praying along these lines for months, but it did become easier for me to pray for her. One thing that I found was that it was easier for me to pray for her when she was either home asleep and I knew she was safe in her bed, or when she was at school and I knew she was being supervised. In both those cases, I knew she was safe from herself, and nothing really interrupted the good flow of ideas that was coming to me from God. Well, at some point we realized that prayer was having a good effect on my daughter. We could start to see tangible signs, whereas she had been just driven to constantly be performing and impressing and producing. She backed off a little bit on that. I think she let up a little bit on herself. and allowed herself to drop some of the activities that weren't as fulfilling anymore, like competitive swimming. I had no idea she didn't like swimming. She was good at it. I just assumed she liked it. Well, she didn't. And I think she was feeling enough self-worth that she didn't judge herself so harshly on, whether she was ticking off all the boxes for her resume, and she was able to let go of swimming. She then joined the lacrosse team. I didn't even know anything about lacrosse, but she was finding joy and something that she could really contribute there. She also found a wonderful group of friends through that lacrosse team and stopped bullying. That was a victory for all of us. And little by little, her obsession with perfect grades began to recede, as I think she found a more natural sense of self-worth. She still cared about her grades, but she didn't judge herself completely on that really narrow ideal there. She was seeing some more of the good, lovable, I'll use that word again, qualities within her and finding something to value there. Well, eventually the whole notion of killing herself became a non-issue. And these days she's a junior in college and she has an exciting future ahead of her. Well, exciting if you like math classes. That's what she's into at this point. But I asked her when I was preparing for tonight, I asked her, was there a turning point for you? Or what was the aha moment for you as you kind of worked through these self-destructive feelings and came out on the other side? And she said that there wasn't one turning point, but she has a memory. She said there were several turning points, but she has a memory that stands out to her as just a really sweet moment in this. And that was one time she was really in the thick of things. Really struggling with self-destructive thoughts, but she was sitting on her bed and the idea came to her that life is meant to be good. Life is meant to be good. That's such a simple idea, but it changed the way she was looking at things. It uplifted her thought, and I think it enabled her to trust in God, trust in good a little bit more than she had before. Now, I well know that idea, life is meant to be good, is a very simple one. In fact, her dad and I had probably mentioned that to her many times over the previous months, but this time it came to her from God, and it stirred something in her. It was meaningful to her. I don't mean that is a cookie cutter approach. We can't just tell everybody that's having depressing thoughts or even suicidal thoughts or ideation, we can't just slap on the bumper sticker, life is meant to be good. That could sound insincere or even kind of tone deaf to some people. So I'm not saying that that's the answer, but getting an idea that stirs in us is really helpful in moving our lives forward. And we can help others do that. When we welcome these ideas, and they make all the difference, they shine a light on the good that's in our lives right now. And it's not like it's a fragile thing. It's not like we need to change reality to make this happen. That's really helpful. If we're counseling or mentoring a troubled teen or something, we don't need to change reality. That would be hard. What we want to do is let ideas from God, whether we call them that in the moment or not, let ideas that are coming to us from divine mind or from love, show them more of who they really are. Show us more of who we really are. Often the thoughts that make a teen or a young adult feel depressed or stressed or that type of thing aren't 100% accurate anyway. Yes, they might have a difficult exam coming up, or yes, they may have just broken up with somebody, and I know that feels tough, but it's probably not the career make or break moment or the lifetime make or break moment that they're feeling like it is in that moment. And spiritual ideas remind us of the good inside us and in our lives that outlast any test or audition or tryout or something like that. And those are the kind of permanent good things that we want to help point out and listen for as we support others. The inspiration that comes to us from God is tailored for each one of us. Love or mind speaks to each one of us in language that's meaningful to us individually. And even in emergency or crisis situations, I've seen this happen, and probably both Scott and Graham have as well. Just when just the right words come, I think Graham started his story that way. Just the right words came for him to share with that young woman that stirred something profound in her and had a healing effect. Ideas from God always bring forth tangible good and allow us to respond in a way that's caring and individualized and never clueless or ignorant or tone deaf again, but genuinely helpful. Now, I've talked a lot about ideas tonight. I'm going to check with Bill. May I continue a little bit more, Bill?
2 more minutes, please.
Okay. How do we find these ideas? Well, I'd like to talk about someone who did that consistently. We have somebody whose life was so based on universally true, helpful ideas, life-saving ideas, that 2,000 years after he said, "My words shall not pass away," we're actually still saying his words. And you probably know I'm talking about Jesus. Because of the spiritual approach he took to life, he was able to discern and connect with and carry out life-saving ideas. How did he do this consistently? Well, I spoke earlier about the concept of humility in prayer and how helpful that is. And he was such a beautiful example of that. He said, talking about how to, consistently be inspired, talking about how to find direction in our lives, he said, "My judgment is just, because I seek not mine own will, but the will of the Father that sent me." That is remarkable humility. And when we do that, when our prayer is based on not making something that we want to happen. I mean, I had very specific things that I wanted to happen to my daughter. Probably one of them was having her continue on the swim team. Little did I realize that that wasn't helpful for her at all. So, I had to let go of some of my ideals, I think, and really let love stir something within me. And when we do that, we're able to let go of feelings of frustration or uncertainty even, and feel that love that heals. Now, I'll wrap this up, but I just want to talk a little bit about someone who really showed this loving presence of God to be present and practical for us is Mary Baker Eddy. And I'm just going to mention her quickly. She is the discoverer of Christian Science, and she's the she was a modern day searcher that showed the everyday practicality of some of the ideas that I'm talking about here. And I want to mention her because she wrote a spiritual textbook called Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, based on the Bible. And that book and the Bible are the basis of my healing practice. And I've learned so much from her about how to help others and address these types of problems. So I'm just going to finish with a quote by her. And this is talking about finding happiness and fulfillment. And she says, "Happiness consists in being and doing good. Only what God gives and what we give ourselves and others through his tenure confers happiness." I love that. That's something that's available to everybody. Happiness is something of God. And she finishes by saying, "Conscious worth satisfies the hungry heart, and nothing else can." Ideas from God bring that conscious sense of worth that we all want and need and crave. And it gives us a good way to go forward, to be healed and to heal others. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you, Melanie, and Scott and Graham. Great contributions from all three of you. We really appreciate it. So now we have time for some interaction with our audience. And what I'll do is I will be presenting some of the questions that we've gotten. And please, for those who are listening, it's not too late. Send us your questions. Just click that Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen and type in a question. And we'll be happy to have one of the panelists or maybe several of the panelists respond to it. So anyway, I'll start with, here's a question that we've received. When biological parents create problems for their children, what can others do? What can communities realistically do? Is there anyone that would like to take a crack at answering that or making some suggestions?
I'm going to nominate Graham for that one because I feel like he talked about how sometimes the go-to adult that children or teens pick is not necessarily their parents, and I'd like to hear more about that, actually.
All right.
Sorry
Well, thank
for
you,
the
Melanie.
thought,
I think
Sure.
you know that's a question that often comes up, especially like a grandparent or an aunt, you know, looking over saying, "Boy, their child is really struggling." It's like a two-part answer. The first part is often the parent doesn't understand how much their child is struggling or the problem is being created. The other thing is that sometimes that child just needs a trusted adult. They just need someone who will listen, not to react, and not necessarily take their side, but just listen with an open heart and help them find their way through it. Like directly in approaching someone saying the way you're raising your child isn't good, that's not a good idea. It doesn't land well. It typically doesn't, it's not helpful. So I think being that trusted adult is the key. And I did reference the little part about making your home a comfortable place for the friends. Making it a comfortable place for that young person would be a key also.
Okay, great. Thank you. Scott, did you have anything you wanted to add on that one?
I'm not sure if I have something specific, but to acknowledge that there are various folks that for whatever reasons, the families are struggling. And then if those of us who want to be helpful is to find ways, and maybe this is exactly the question, but to connect them with helpful people. Now, whether that would be at the schools and the wellness centers, or in terms of involvements of activities, or in terms of community groups, or certainly church groups, but to help the young person or anyone to find sources of support. And that can also include professional sources of support, whether our telephone lines or to counselors or spiritual directors, whoever it is that can be helpful.
Great. Okay. Melanie, did you have anything else that you wanted to add on that one?
No.
Okay, then here's another one. Do you have any suggestions for uplifting music, video, books, other content that you think would be relevant to today's teens to help them when they have these kind of problems? Melanie?
Well, I talked to my two kids earlier tonight about how they would respond to that question. And, maybe just as a practical resource, I think you really can search online for things like playlists. Spotify creates playlists that are clean, and so just depending on your interest in music, I really think that there's stuff out there that can be found that's still, relevant and enjoyable to teens and young adults. I think what it takes on the parents' part is a little bit more initiative. I'm finding that I have to express a little bit more initiative with my teens than I thought I would need to. I have to directly ask them, what are you listening to? Is this something that I would like at all? And not be self-conscious myself. Who's going to do that for them if I don't? And so I liked this question because I think it shows some proactivity on the parents' part of being willing to get involved. And I think that's the bigger issue. You can Google anything and find good stuff, but the bigger issue is being able to connect with the teen in a way that's meaningful and that can allow some new media in, new music or movies or whatever.
Okay, great. Scott, any other comments?
Oh, I would like to add, I like the question very much, and I want to recognize that certainly it is very helpful to have positive input in our lives, and certainly in a spiritual framework, and obviously we've been hearing all about references to Jesus or the Bible, and obviously that can be wonderful and positive, although, and maybe there even, since the question was about songs, for those that find the worship songs or hymns or whatever, then great. Now, even as I say that, I always like to think about a skit that I saw years ago on Saturday Night Live. And it was these people in an office setting, And they were initially, this was part of the punchline, but all these women together, and they're listening to a sad Adele song by Adele about, I don't know, the breakup or whatever, and they're all crying. And by the way, the punchline was there was a man who came along, I guess it would be based on, they're making fun of gender-based stereotypes, but all the same, a man joins the group, and eventually he too cries along with that music, thinking about whatever losses. Now, the reason I say this is I think there can be value in either watching movies or shows or listening to music or something that can reflect our emotions and help us to identify with the emotions, including the emotions that are painful or difficult.
Mm.
So it's a both and. I certainly wouldn't want to wallow forever in the pain or the anger or the fury, but sometimes that can reflect and communicate what someone is experiencing.
Mm.
Okay, great. Graham, do you have anything to add on this one?
Not really, because music is such a personal taste. If you were to ask me what's the best, most uplifting music, it's bagpipe music. I don't know if the rest of you agree. When I'm feeling down, that's what I listen to.
Yeah, well, it wasn't, the question wasn't limited to music. How about books or any other just source of uplift?
A key part of it is sharing the experience. And just like Scott, where they're all in the office crying, they're sharing an experience. And that's really the thing. If you've got your ear pods on and you're in a dark closet listening music all day, that's really not healing, right? You have to get out and share what you're thinking. And so that shared experience, I think, is the key of book, movie, or song.
May I add to that, that I thought of this just recently. One of the challenges these days in the time of our shelter in place in many parts of California or many parts of our country is that I believe that humanity has lost the opportunity for shared emotional experiences. Even if we don't communicate that emotion with the other people. Let's say when we're at a worship service, some folks don't communicate directly with the others there, but there's a shared experience. And that is a loss these days.
Thank you. Okay, another question here. This one is how to help children whose parent has died. Anybody want to take a crack at that one?
Well, let me add that there are many levels of that, certainly, and to be sensitive and be aware of that that is a loss. Maybe that's obvious, and that affects someone. And that, let's say, we here at the Contra Costa Crisis Center have support groups, even for children or youth who have lost someone to death. And just to recognize that that's a resource, or counseling is a resource. There's a center called the Dougie Center in one of the northern states. I don't remember which, but just that, to connect to the services and support that can be out there.
Okay. Graham, anything on that?
Yeah, the thing on experiencing grief is there's no right way or wrong way to experience it. And so especially for a young person who often doesn't have any other experiences to draw from, they don't understand. There's a lot of stuff, the 5 or 6 steps of grief, and understanding they're not sequential. You can be, I can be in advocacy, I can be in denial, I can be in bargaining, all in the same minute, right? I'm like a fly in a lampshade sometimes. But for a young person to understand, these are things that you will experience, and it's perfectly normal. You'll be okay. It gets better, right? The pain doesn't get better. You just get better at dealing with it. One of the things when we're talking about the music is a slogan that we use in mental health a lot, especially in suicide prevention, is "You're not alone." And right now, so many of us feel alone. And so I think that's this heightened sense of anxiety and loss. And my heart goes out to this person who's lost a parent. Yeah.
Melanie, did you have anything to add on this one?
I'm actually going to quote something that was said earlier in the presentation tonight, and I can't remember which one of you two said this, but be welcoming in their struggles. I think that might have been Scott. I love the softness of heart of that. You know, the person that's helping we want to have a balance between authority or maybe some ideas of how to help, but also just the love. I mean, just the immediate love and showing the grieving person the good that continues in their life. I mean, there's always something good that's permanent and reliable, and helping them look at that in their life, and you know, and have that be a buffer or even a healing element against their pain, but welcoming, you know, welcoming and as Graham said, that there's really no wrong way to communicate their grief.
It can be challenging because sometimes experiences of grief or experiences of stress are manifested in ways that are difficult for others. In other words, some may manifest that in actually their, they would be more angry or less patient. So it's challenging.
Yeah. Okay, here's another question. I'm a school counselor and struggle with getting support from parents to support their child. For example, I start helping a student, the parent becomes aware their child is talking with me, and then the parent tells the child not to talk with me or open up. It is heartbreaking. How can the negative stigma of mental health help be broken? Graham, Scott?
All right, so I'll start off on that one. Part of my other responsibilities is I'm a consultant to NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And so our biggest challenge is that stigma. And unfortunately, that story, I've heard that over and over again of the parent not wanting the child to receive services. And what it really boils down to is fear. It could be fear of being labeled, fear of the family admitting that not everybody's perfect, but there's definitely a fear in there. And sometimes it's a cultural fear of talking to someone about mental health. There's three legs to supporting the student: the students themselves, the parents, and then the faculty and staff. So, you know, if it's becoming common that the parents aren't responding, then it's time for some parent ed, right? About the importance of mental health. And luckily, parents are much more open to this than they were even 5 years ago. Acknowledging it.
Okay,
I
Scott.
think certainly it's the goal. And by the way, right now we're in May and it's Mental Health Awareness Month. And so part of that is work in raising awareness of mental health needs and reducing stigma. And I like very much some of the things that I've seen around and about where it's about our own changing the language. And it's not about whatever, I don't even want to say some of the negative words that are sometimes used by some people, but to talk about people in their struggles or their challenges or their needs, and simply that's usual and human. And I think most everyone feels stress at some point or another, or anxiety or at some point or another, or feels down at some point or another, or struggles in one way or another at some point or another for whatever length of time or another. And we want to be there to help one another.
Great, thank you. Melanie, anything to add on this one?
No, I like their answer.
Okay, here's another question. I had no idea as a teen how much my weight seemed to ruin almost everything in my life. I struggled with depression and suicide for decades. It wasn't a symptom so much as a cause. How do we help so many girls see that being sober, not diet, about their eating can help hear other good ideas and help their good reasoning and to lead their lives forward?
I'll address that one. Maybe just because it really pulls on my heart, both as a fellow woman, I guess. You know, I struggled quite a bit during my college years and even after that with just the whole cycle of overeating and I suppose low self-esteem. I had this really aha moment one time that I wasn't self-conscious because I was fat. I think I was fat because I was self-conscious. Honestly, I mean, the fat seemed like a symptom to me. I think that might have been, I think that the caller might have been saying it wasn't like that for her, but I do think that the two feelings are really, I mean, self-esteem and appearance, I suppose, are really wrapped up with one another. But we have to get a larger perspective. You know, I think what often needs to happen, I mean, if I were mentoring a young woman who was struggling with, you know, either eating issues or feeling too large to be accepted by her peers or something like that, I would really encourage her to find a much more reliable source of self-worth. And I, you know, you all know I'm admittedly coming at this from a spiritual perspective, but I mean, I do feel like, you know, whether the person calls it God or not, I've had really good conversations with atheists or non-believers or skeptics about this as well too, that we do all feel like there's something, there's a place we can go in thought that gives us a better sense of our self-worth than the mirror or comments that we're hearing from other people. And, you know, whatever we want to call that source of information, I would call it divine love or God. If we can encourage people to get quiet enough in thought to hear, you know, specific ideas from that source, that has a way of loosening the grip.
Scott, Graham, any other comments on that one? Okay.
Well, I don't feel like an expert at that, but I think what I heard in the question is the struggle with, what is that, body shaming. I think I heard that in the question, and then maybe if that contributes to eating habits that are unhealthy. So there are at least a couple levels of that, but if people can find a place where of acceptance or support, no matter who we are and where we are and how we are, that I think can be helpful. And of course, I think even as Graham pointed out, or anyone would point out ever, anywhere, is it's good to make healthy choices for ourselves.
Okay. Graham, anything you wanted to add on that one?
You know, none of us are perfect. We all have things that affect how we perceive ourselves to others. And it could be weight or, you know, way we speak or color of our hair or whatever. Finding that self-acceptance is the key. And there's different paths on that, but I definitely know the spiritual path is a great one. I know it's one that's helped me. And it's what helped us through our loss is that faith. And so that's a very strong thing that should never be discounted when it comes to that. And if the person is really kind of stuck on their self-image, then professional help would definitely help them.
Well, let me add, if I may, adding to the faith perspective, something that is very meaningful to me, and Melanie had referred to the creation accounts and God creating all things good, and that humanity has an intrinsic value, and all people have a value, no matter what their struggles are. And if people, hopefully, if we can communicate that, and if people can internalize that, that can be very helpful.
Great, thank you. Another question. How can I support my 12-year-old son who has expressed and explained his suicidal thoughts because he feels rejected for his love of first-person shooter gaming, which I hate? I see so much life and joy and creativity in him, but he aims for fame and fortune as a gamer, as Graham described. He struggles in school. Graham,
So
would you like to comment?
A video game is his own world, one in which he understands the rules and the consequences. But unlike a video game, we don't have a reset button. And so as we go through, sometimes we make mistakes and then they kind of seem to keep going. So if someone, you know, a 12-year-old boy really loves the video game, that's actually not a good thing. Just screens in general. And it's diminishing the ability to actually interact with people, which is the consequence. So I think that, you know, really understanding the impact of that video game. There's a book called The Wired Child by a local psychologist in Antioch, Kaiser, Dr. Freed. I highly recommend it for understanding what the actual physiological response is that's going on in that young man as he plays that game, and how to find that pleasure somewhere else.
Scott, Melanie, anything you'd like to add on those?
Well, I'll just jump in and say, I kind of had a watershed moment myself. Just in my practice, I deal with or work with parents that have similar complaints like this. And I had to do some kind of sobering, learning, I guess, about just exactly what Graham is talking about. I mean, that, you know, I felt like I didn't want to judge somebody else's gaming or something like that. But thank you, Graham, for saying that it's, you know, a video game addiction is just, it's not good. I mean, you know, we need to say that it's you know, and parents understandably have individual ways of approaching, you know, the rules that they have in place about how much or what types of games that their kids can play. But I'm finding, again, that as a parent, I'm needing to step up to the plate a little bit more with, you know, I have 2 girls and a boy, and not surprisingly, the boy is the one that's most attracted to the video games. And we've had to put some strict but very unpopular rules in place with him, but it has made all the difference. We have to give kids space to, well, I'm going to say, you know, to be inspired, to hear ideas from mind. And when you're just really confronted with a screen, you're not getting that space. Now, that's obvious to the mom, but I mean, the step that I had to learn was I had to have the moral courage to step in and change the rules and lay down rules and be unpopular with my kid for a little while, because the payoff was worth it.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, next up. This isn't a question, but just wanted to share that being someone who struggled with suicidal impulses and attempted suicide, I needed to feel a sense of unconditional love, but also how to change. I wanted to change and didn't think I could. I didn't want the pain to end. I felt I deserved the pain and wanted to kill myself to get rid of what I thought was the problem, me. When I realized suicide wasn't going to change anything, wasn't going to solve the problem, this, along with a spiritual solution, a real way out, and a more spiritual sense of myself, the impulses stopped. It was always a desire for change, and I could surrender to a higher power and let myself be changed naturally, spiritually, gently, through yielding, instead of trying to kill myself. Would anyone like to comment on that comment? It was pretty well
it's
stated.
a great testimony. And I do recognize that I had remarked, I don't know if this person was responding to one of my remarks, of that really a lot of people, it's not that they really wish to die, they want their pain to end. This fellow was saying that he did think about and preferred to die. And I do recognize that a lot of people, in whatever the circumstances, feel that that is, at least for the moment, they believe the best way out. And if we can, one way or another, provide a path of hope, or even help people to find the hope that may be within, then that can be a tremendous service.
Great. Well, it's 9:22 according to my clock, and I think we've had a wonderful program here. I think what I'd like to do next is just ask each of you to give us a little, one of Graham's nuggets. If there's nothing else that people take away from your talk tonight or from this program, I'm going to ask each one of you in turn to say what it is, the most important thing that you think someone should take away, just one idea, what would it be? And I guess I'm going to start with, I'll go through the same order that we went through on the discussions. And Scott, I'll start with you. What is the most important nugget, the most important treasure to take away from your perspective?
Well, I think it can be very helpful for people to reach out when they feel the need, and for any of us who feel so called to be able to respond to those around us in need.
Thank you. Graham, what's your nugget?
My nugget is that you are not alone. That these struggles that we all experience, these thoughts that creep in, when we see those statistics of how many kids have thought about taking life, they're not alone. So it's encouraging that discussion and addressing the stigma, because believe it or not, the head is connected to the body, and it gets sick also. So that's it. You're not alone. Get help.
Thank you. Melanie, your nugget, please.
I'm just going to continue with the "you're not alone" theme. That's just really sums it up beautifully. I mean, and I think it dovetails with what both of you just said too. For all of us to feel a genuine sense of self-worth is really a healing thing, and we're companioned by God. We're companioned by ideas from God that bring that feeling of self-worth.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to one more time repeat that phone number for the people who called in and haven't had the benefit of the screen, so that you can call this number and leave your contact information so we can send you, find out the best way to send you these help resources. And that phone number again is area code 925-932-1415. 925-932-1415. And what I'd like to do is to close now with a benediction from the Bible. The Lord bless thee and keep thee. The Lord make his face shine upon thee and be gracious unto thee. The Lord lift up his countenance upon thee and give thee peace. So thank you all for joining with us, and God bless.
Thank you.